I am delighted and honored to be here with you, and I would like to thank all those who have contributed in animating the Congress, and especially Chiara Bertoglio, Maria Borghesi and Daniele Palma, for their invaluable work with the association JSBach. My name is Giorgio Dellarole, and I am an accordionist. I teach accordion at the Conservatory Arrigo Boito in Parma. For more than 20 years, I devote myself mainly to study, teach and play the Baroque and classic repertoire, being one of the first to bring my instrument to the experts' attention. At the same time, through my courses and master classes, I'm diffusing among the accordionists the idea of a rigorous philological and stylistic research applied to the early music. Over the years, I studied with professors such as Emilia Fadini, Marco Farolfi and Luco Berti, and I played with performers such as Michele Andalò, Fiorella Andriani, Francesco Baroni, Svetlana Fomina, Luca Giardini, Paola Nervi, Alessandro Palmeri, Alessandro Tampieri, Kreta Maria Kentala and Jani Sunnarborg from Finland, and Invitarum from Estonia. I deal not only with early music, but I played and recorded as a soloist and with chamber groups many different repertoires, from contemporary music to tango. The practice of transcribing is an integral part of the music activity in the 17th and 18th centuries. We can state that it belongs to the concept of Baroque music itself. Adapting a composition to an instrument other than the original one was an usual work for Bach and his contemporaries. Further, a new rendition of a piece of music didn't impoverish its meaning. On the contrary, it confirmed its validity. Besides all, we know that, especially as regards keyboards, but not only, it was absolutely normal to play the same piece on different instruments, and it was natural to adapt the interpretation to the features of every specific instrument. We have to assume that the Baroque and classical musicians were much more practical than we think, and maybe the relative essentiality of writing is due also to the need to avoid to overload the scores with potentially misleading symbols when they switch from one to another instrument. There are many reports of the practice of adaptation, from Alessandro Scarlatti that explains how to sustain the same longer notes with an arpeggio on the harpsichord and holding the keys on the organ, to Mozart that wrote to his father that he saw an harpsichordist making faces to simulate dynamics, instead of taking advantage of the features of his instrument. The idea of transcribing and adapting the ancient repertoire on modern instruments such as the accordion is therefore not an impromptu activity, but it has its roots in the very period from which most of the literature adapted by contemporary musicians is drawn. However, it is a rather controversial practice, which can be clarified if it is observed from the right perspective. We can tell it with the words of Marco Farolfi, harpsichordist, pianist and musicologist. From a certain point of view, he said, we can say that the instrument has the role of the mediator that conveys the musical message, and we can therefore consider it as an intermediary on which the musical ideas of the interpreter who plays it take shape. If the instrument becomes a medium, the music is the matter, which means that also the modern instrumental mediator will take the greatest possible care to respect the style and character of the musical pieces. Consequently, the choice of a current instrumental mediator will not prevent to express the piece of music in the most respectful way of its peculiar stylistic features. The knowledge about the performance praxis and the ancient musical language allows to express the feelings of important artwork of the past early music using either original instruments or modern ones. The interpretative idea can be expressed by a proposal which gives priority to the music composition, respecting its musical nature, and looks at the instrument, the modern mediator, only as the object of its realization. The use of historical instruments to play early music can help recreate the atmosphere imagined by the composer. But today, after hundreds of years, many new instruments enrich our music life. We can say that each of these instruments can be adapted to any music style, and no one can say which one is more appropriate if it does not prevail on the nature and on the contents of the music that it creates. When we transcribe a piece of music for an instrument different from that for which it was designed, some opportunities arise, but we have to proceed carefully because challenges increase too. We need to understand the composer's language with his historical background, and it is useful to know the original instruments for which the work was created. Their restoration and their increasing availability in the last decades, thanks to the many faithful copies to the original, allows us to go back to the original sound that, in my opinion, must inspire our performances using modern instruments. I'm not suggesting simply imitating the timbre or the touch of ancient instruments, but becoming aware of the primordial sound and taking inspiration from it. Further, I believe that we have to fit the early repertoire to our modern instruments and to propose our own interpretation in order to play in a convincing way. But our choices must be based on the deep understanding of the original scores, as well as of the historical background and of the original sound. I don't think that the path to be followed is simply trying to imitate the articulation of the organ or the harpsichord on a modern instrument, which actually is a convenient solution often adopted by pianists and accordionists. First of all, there is a distorted picture of the harpsichord that should not be considered only for its brilliant sound, but also for its countless uncaught shades. Secondly, this action hides an intellectual laziness. It is as though the modern performer gave up the possibility of having an active role in playing, being saddled on a comfort cliché that gives, in one hand, security, but on the other hand, it makes the modern musical performances of Baroque music, already weighed down by linearity and speed, rather boring and monotonous. I understand it's hard to leave our interpretative tradition and to put in discussion our habits, but I think it's important to cultivate the seed of that, to grow and to improve our skills. In this regard, Emilia Fadini used some wonderful words in an essay on the Spanish influence in the Scarlatti's sonatas. She wrote, "The individuation of the precise dance rhythm gives security to the interpreter, while an affetto of undefined times creates insecurity. But let me tell, insecurity seduces. The insecurity charm leads to any kind of analysis, encourages to state personal choices, to compare them to other ones, to revisit them anytime we want to feel the experience in the interpretation act. And why not to take advantage of the accordion, to try to set a new path in the interpretation of the early repertoire? It is a resourceful instrument. It has some strong popular roots, and this is not a shame, but we can place it in the evolutionary line of organs. It has not to shoulder the heavy tradition of piano. It is halfway between keyboards, strings, and wind instruments, and its sound, with its technical features, allows it to enlighten new aspects of musical works. Besides all, the breakneck pace of developments in the last decades has ennobled this instrument, and in my experience, the classical music world is ready to accept the presence of the modern accordion. To go back to the early music, we are no longer in the times of pioneers of research, when the key word was authenticity. This was a term introduced by Arnold Dolmetsch that started the cultural movement of early music with his essay The Interpretation of the Music of the 17th and 18th Centuries, published in London in 1915. The word authenticity, implicitly, labeled as infidel the interpretative tradition in vogue in the early 20th century, when the late Romantic aesthetic dominated the music scene and influenced the performance of Baroque pieces too. Based on a reconstruction of ancient instruments, at the beginning especially the recorder and the viola da gamba, the concept of authenticity inspired a rather elitist movement, which aroused controversies and excluded the use of non-original instruments. Over the decades, interest on this matter increased, and knowledge in interpretative, organologic and technical field were enhanced. The development of musicology, starting from the immediate post-war period, provided a further impetus to researches and put in crisis some of the dogmas that characterized the first movement of early music, causing in this way the mutation of the basic concept, which turns into historically informed performance, opening the way to the use of non-original instruments. I always like to quote the words of Fabio Biondi, violinist and conductor specialized in the interpretation of early music. In October 2007, in an interview published by the magazine Sistema Musica of Turin, he said to Diego Marangon, "The study of how the early music repertoire was played has achieved a great victory by sharing its history and language. Now it has to win over the preconception of the instrument. I can envisage a great coalition coming about in the future, guided both by a knowledge of the score and the musician's awareness, where Bach can be played equally well on the harpsichord or the accordion." In my opinion, the words knowledge and awareness, strictly in that order, are the keys to set a correct approach to the adaptation of early repertoire on modern instruments, and more, to approach any kind of repertoire. It is really important to be aware of the work that you are dealing with, and you have to be informed to know the context in which it was written and understand the language spoken by the author. This is especially difficult when you deal with the Baroque repertoire, because it has not come down to us with a linear path, but it has been shelved before and then revisited, misrepresented in the light of Romantic aesthetics, and only recently rediscovered and more carefully and respectfully examined. It is very old music, written for old instruments, that nowadays probably have been modified in their structure, and because of this they sound differently in relation to the past. I talked about the importance of understanding the language, but the writing does not help us. For several reasons, in particular the one concerning keyboard instruments, is extremely essential, and it lacks of a lot of symbols that we are used to find in the most recent scores. Moreover, often ornaments are implied, and the diffusion of the practice of improvisation prevents us from knowing exactly what and how music sounded at that time. However, we must not make the mistake of thinking that the Baroque writing is primitive or incomplete compared to the modern one. Enrico Fubini writes in Musica e linguaggio dell'estetica contemporanea, in English Music and Language in Contemporary Aesthetics, published by Einaudi in 1973. Every score is exhaustive in relation to the proper needs of every time. The supposed inadequacy, or, as some say even more improperly, the incompleteness of the score, belongs to the condition of existence of music and to its need to be performed, brought back to life in every new rendition. Unfortunately, there is still no considerable amount of modern reviews of Baroque scores, with reasonable indications, brought into line with the modern musicological researches, and therefore, even for the modern instruments, I recommend using Urtext edition. In our case, the instrument is the modern accordion, and I'm aware that there is a need for some more information about it. The modern accordion is a very challenging instrument. It comes from a long evolution, started with the first portable instruments with metal reeds and bellows, born in Europe in the first half of the 19th century. There are a lot of different types of accordions, and we can speak of a family of instruments, rather than a single instrument. Some accordions have buttons in the right side, with many different placements, and some others keys. In the left side, there are always buttons, usually 120, with 20 rows by 6 buttons, and here too we can find different placements. What is common to different types of instrument, referring to the modern classical accordion, is the high quality of the material and the craftsmanship, a range of about 7 octaves, and a delicate and a refined sound, without the typical beats of the traditional accordions. Despite many differences between different countries, the accordion is now included in all the main academies and conservatories, and most of the contemporary composers use it as solo instrument or in chamber groups. As we said, in some way the accordion is a portable organ with a significant dynamic range, and it is very suitable to perform a good part of the repertoire for keyboards from 17th and 18th centuries. The music from 17th century, especially the one not dedicated to a specific instrument, is really suitable for the modern accordion, but we can play successfully a wide repertoire from the late Renaissance to the Classicism. Someone says that an accordion may be a whole orchestra, and therefore a piece like the concert BWV 978 for harpsichord by Bach, from the original concert number 3 RV 578 from the Estroarmonico by Antonio Vivaldi, seemed like a very good choice to conclude my speech. It was written in Weimar, probably from 1713 to 1717, with many other concerts adapted to the keyboard and taken from some orchestral works by Vivaldi, Marcello, Telemann and others. We know that the Duke William Ernst IV of Saxe-Weimar, employer of Bach during his time in Weimar, went to the University of Utrecht from 1711 to 1713. and had the opportunity to listen to the renowned organist Jan Jacob de Graaf in the new church in Amsterdam. This blind musician used to adapt to the organ some orchestral works from Italian composers. The Duke was dazzled, and when he moved back to Weimar, he brought back a lot of concerts and asked to Bach and to Johann Gottfried Walther to adapt them to the keyboard. Let us remember that by that time, Amsterdam was one of the most important cities in Europe for the music publishing. Bach and Walther agreed to this proposal, and 22 concerts by Bach, 16 Manualiter and 6 Pedaliter, have been preserved for us. For my playing, I worked on the Bärenreiter edition, published by Karl Heller. I fully respected the original score in the first and third movements, trying to propose a credible Baroque articulation for keyboard, with some dynamic effects inspired by the original score for orchestra and made possible by the accordion. In the second movement, I decided to use the preset chords in my left hand. This is the typical system of the traditional accordion that coexists with the free basses system of the classical instrument. In this way, I was not able to play the exact pitch of every note, but I can play some very compact chords and I can concentrate on the melodic line in the right hand. I hope you like it and appreciate my way of performing Baroque music with my accordion. Thanks to all my listeners and thanks to Loredana Dujani for supporting me in the translation. Enjoy the music.